December 8, 1941. Tokyo. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Admiral Osamu Nagano leaned over the latest reports with grim satisfaction. America's Pacific Fleet lay shattered, 8 battleships crippled, hundreds of planes destroyed, thousands dead. For a moment, Japan believed it had bought itself naval supremacy. But what no one in Tokyo realized, not Nagano, not Yamamoto, not even Japan's sharpest intelligence officers, was that America's real power wasn't anchored at Pearl Harbor. It was hidden in rusting ship graveyards, in forgotten reserve fleets, and in shipyards that looked sleepy and underused. Within months, those ghost fleets would rise again. Within years, America would unleash the greatest naval buildup in human history, ships pouring off assembly lines faster than Japan could sink them. What began as a tactical victory for Japan would soon spiral into a nightmare, as industrial might replaced naval strategy, and mathematics began deciding the war. If you love deep dives into history's turning points, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit like to help this story reach more people, and subscribe so you never miss the next documentary. Share this with a friend who loves WWII history, because the story of America's ghost fleet is one they probably haven't heard before. December 7, 1941, is often remembered as the day Japan appeared unstoppable. The images of battleships ablaze in Pearl Harbor circulated worldwide, fueling a perception that America's naval backbone had been snapped clean in half. In Tokyo, the mood was triumphant. Admiral Nagano and his colleagues studied the reports with satisfaction, convinced that Japan had crippled America's ability to resist. To them, the Pacific had become a Japanese lake overnight, ripe for expansion. Yet, beneath the smoke and wreckage in Hawaii, a different reality was brewing. America's carriers were still afloat. Repair docks and fuel reserves remained intact. Most crucially, the country's greatest weapon hadn't even entered the battlefield: industry. For decades, America had maintained fleets of outdated, mothballed ships, neglected relics left to rust quietly in rivers and bays. To many, these vessels were embarrassments, too old to scrap, too costly to maintain properly. But the attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. Suddenly, those forgotten hulks became lifelines. Orders were dispatched to revive anything that could float. Engineers, shipyard workers, and contractors scrambled to breathe life into steel skeletons that hadn't moved in years. While Japan celebrated, American workers attacked clogged pipes, stripped away rust, and overhauled engines caked with salt and corrosion. Some decks sprouted weeds, others hosted bird nests, yet within weeks these ghosts stirred back to life. This was America's first counterpunch, not glamorous battleships or mighty carriers, but oilers, repair ships, and transports. Vessels that kept fleets moving, fed crews, delivered ammunition, and made prolonged campaigns in the Pacific logistically possible. Meanwhile, Japan's intelligence services misread the situation entirely. Their pre-war estimates assumed America could barely manage 500,000 tons of naval construction annually. They never imagined an industrial surge that would dwarf their entire empire. The flaw wasn't simply mathematical. Japanese officers judged America through a cultural lens, divided by labor strikes, weakened by racial tensions, softened by consumer comforts. They mistook peacetime inefficiency for permanent incapacity. It was a fatal miscalculation. In Washington, President Roosevelt and his advisors understood that victory would not come from quick naval engagements. Instead, it would be won on factory floors, through shipyards, foundries, and assembly lines capable of outproducing Japan at every turn. This was a war that demanded logistics. Every bomb dropped, every torpedo launched, every mile steamed across the Pacific relied on an invisible web of supply. And supply, in war, meant ships, thousands of them. Pearl Harbor, ironically, accelerated America's unity. Political divisions dissolved overnight. Unions pledged not to strike. Women streamed into factories. Minorities gained entry into defense industries. The same social tensions Japan dismissed now became engines of mobilization. By early 1942, America was already proving Japan wrong. Liberty ships began sliding down the ways at astonishing speed. Old reserves sailed again. Workers who once built cars or dams now welded hulls together with dizzying efficiency. Japan's initial strategy relied on the decisive battle doctrine, crush America before it could rebuild. But with every passing month, it became clear the U.S. wasn't simply rebuilding. It was transforming, creating a naval machine unlike anything seen before. The irony was stark. The very success of Pearl Harbor ignited the mobilization that would bury Japan's empire. What looked like a masterstroke was, in reality, the spark that awakened America's industrial giant. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, privately understood this risk. Having studied in the United States, he warned that Japan could run wild for a year, but beyond that, American capacity would overwhelm them. His words proved prophetic. By 1943, convoys of American-built ships stretched across oceans, their numbers staggering. What began with reactivated ghost fleets had grown into a torrent of steel. Japan could no longer sink vessels fast enough to slow the tide. The aftermath of Pearl Harbor was not, as Tokyo believed, the beginning of American collapse. It was the beginning of industrial war, a war Japan was destined to lose the moment the first rusted ship coughed back to life. Along the quiet waters of Virginia's James River, rows of forgotten vessels sat motionless. Their decks were streaked with rust, their engines long silent. For years, they'd been dismissed as relics of a bygone war. But after Pearl Harbor, these hulks suddenly became invaluable. Government orders crackled across telegraph lines, reactivate anything that could float. Civilian contractors, naval engineers, and shipyard workers descended on the reserve fleets with urgency bordering on desperation. What they found was daunting. Engine rooms flooded with stagnant water, machinery corroded into useless lumps of iron, ventilation shafts packed with bird nests and rodent droppings. Some ships had weeds sprouting across their decks. To most eyes, these were hopeless wrecks. But in wartime, hope was forged from necessity. Crews tore into the work, scraping rust, patching steel, coaxing life from boilers that hadn't seen flame in decades. The USS Bridgeport became a symbol of resurrection. Originally seized from Germany during World War I, she belched thick black smoke as her boilers roared awake. Locals lined the shore, watching a ghost return to life. By the spring of 1942, dozens of these vessels were back at sea. They weren't battleships or carriers, but they performed vital roles: tankers, transports, repair ships, ammunition carriers, the quiet lifeblood of naval warfare. Their return bought America something priceless: time. While new ships were still under construction, these revitalized workhorses kept supply lines open, ferried troops, and allowed damaged vessels to be repaired close to the front. For the sailors who manned them, the experience was surreal. Many served aboard ships older than themselves, patched together with parts scavenged from scrapyards. Yet those vessels carried them safely across oceans into history. Japan's naval planners never accounted for this. They saw only the official fleet registers and assumed America's strength ended with the battleships at Pearl Harbor. The reserve fleets, rotting quietly, never entered their calculations. In reality, these ghost fleets became force multipliers. Every tanker reactivated meant more carriers could stay at sea. Every repair ship restored meant damaged destroyers returned to battle weeks earlier than expected. Logistics became a weapon. Shipyards along the east and west coasts buzzed with activity. Civilian dock workers, many untrained in naval work, were thrust into overnight crash courses. What mattered wasn't perfection, it was speed, improvisation, and relentless determination. Sometimes, ingenuity bordered on madness. One team reportedly cannibalized parts from 3 different mothballed destroyers to bring a single hull back to life. Welders worked by lantern light through freezing nights to meet deadlines. The press rarely covered these vessels. They lacked the glamour of aircraft carriers or the power of Iowa-class battleships. But commanders knew the truth. Without auxiliaries, no offensive fleet could move an inch. By mid-1942, Ghost Fleet ships were steaming across the Pacific. They carried ammunition for Guadalcanal, oil for carrier task forces, and food for Marines fighting in jungles thousands of miles from home. Their names rarely made headlines, yet their presence was felt everywhere. A transport might deliver reinforcements just in time. A repair ship might patch a cruiser so it could rejoin the fight. Their value wasn't measured in firepower but in persistence. The Japanese submarines that prowled Pacific waters soon noticed the change. Convoys grew larger, escorts more numerous. Each ghost ship reactivated helped tip the balance, stretching Japan's thin resources further until hunting became almost suicidal. What began as rusted hulks on forgotten rivers evolved into a logistical web spanning the globe. These ships, once discarded, became the connective tissue of America's rising naval might, bridging the gap until production surged. Awakening the Ghost Fleet proved that in war, no resource is truly obsolete. Steel might rust, engines might seize, but with willpower and urgency, even forgotten relics could shape the outcome of a world at war. Before Pearl Harbor, Japanese intelligence officers worked tirelessly to assess America's capacity for war. They tallied steel production, counted shipyard slips, and studied labor disputes, believing they had captured an accurate picture of U.S. strength. Their conclusion seemed reasonable. They estimated America might produce 500,000 tons of naval vessels annually, with merchant shipbuilding stretching to perhaps 2 million tons under extreme effort. On paper, these numbers reassured Tokyo. But the assumptions behind them were flawed. Analysts judged American workers as complacent, unwilling to endure long hours or make sacrifices. They saw a society consumed by consumerism, divided by class and racial tensions. This interpretation missed something vital: the difference between peacetime apathy and wartime mobilization. When threatened, Americans rallied with staggering speed, erasing inefficiencies overnight. Labor unions that once clashed with management pledged no strikes for the war's duration. Minorities, long sidelined in industry, gained entry into defense work. Women flooded factories in unprecedented numbers. What Japanese observers mistook as weakness became the foundation of an industrial transformation beyond anything they had imagined. Reports from naval attachés in Washington reinforced the misconception. They described slow-moving bureaucracies, underused shipyards, and workers reluctant to accept overtime. Accurate in peacetime, those observations collapsed the moment war demands reshaped priorities. When junior intelligence officers warned of greater American potential, their concerns were often dismissed. Strategic doctrine built around a quick, decisive battle convinced Tokyo that long-term calculations were irrelevant. Why worry about ships America couldn't finish in time? This doctrine, Kaiser, envisioned a single climactic clash that would cripple U.S. resolve. Japan believed victory required swift blows before industrial momentum gathered. But the war unfolded differently, dragging on, exposing the limits of their assumptions. By 1943, reality shattered illusions. America produced 19 million tons of shipping, nearly 10 times what Japanese planners had projected. The scale defied imagination, overwhelming Japan's capacity to sink ships as fast as they appeared. The intelligence failure wasn't about poor data alone, it was about interpretation. Japanese analysts counted shipyards but never envisioned mass production techniques, modular assembly, or the reactivation of old fleets. They underestimated not numbers, but adaptability. Cultural bias deepened the blindness. Japan prized discipline and hierarchy, while America seemed chaotic and divided. They failed to recognize how democracy's flexibility could become strength, transforming inefficiency into innovation under the pressure of survival. Even when evidence mounted, neutral reports of hundreds of new American ships appearing in Atlantic ports, Japanese intelligence dismissed them. Surely, they thought, the Americans were exaggerating, counting vessels twice, or simply fabricating claims. The consequences were devastating. Submarine commanders returning from patrols warned of larger convoys, denser escorts, constant air patrols. Their superiors often dismissed these accounts as exaggerations, unwilling to believe America's Navy was multiplying so quickly. By the time Japanese leaders realized the truth, the mathematics of war had turned against them. America's production numbers were not temporary spikes, but sustained avalanches. Supported by resources Japan could neither match nor disrupt. The intelligence gap was not only technical, but psychological. Japan underestimated America's will to fight, imagining the population too soft, too fragmented to endure prolonged war. Pearl Harbor itself had destroyed that illusion instantly. Tokyo's planners believed industrial arithmetic could be ignored if courage and tactical brilliance prevailed. But courage cannot build ships, and tactics cannot replace fuel tankers or supply transports. Misjudging logistics condemned Japan to fight an unwinnable war. Looking back, the blindness seems astonishing. Yet, in the closed circles of Imperial Navy leadership, it felt logical. They believed what they wanted to believe, clinging to doctrine even as reality proved otherwise. Japan's intelligence miscalculation wasn't a single error, but a chain of cultural assumptions, flawed data, and strategic arrogance. It ensured that when America's ghost fleets awakened, Tokyo was still looking for a battle that no longer mattered. In the frantic months after Pearl Harbor, America needed more than courage. It needed ships, thousands of them. The responsibility for this impossible task fell to a little-known New Deal agency, the U.S. Maritime Commission. Before the war, the Commission had quietly overseen a declining merchant fleet. By late 1941, it transformed overnight into the architect of the largest shipbuilding program in human history. Its mission was staggering in scope. At the helm stood Admiral Emory S. Land, a man who understood both engineering and Washington bureaucracy. His guiding principle was brutally simple. America must build ships faster than Japan could sink them. Land's commission wielded unprecedented authority. It could commandeer shipyards, allocate critical steel and engines, redirect labor, and enforce coordination across industries. To Japanese observers, it was invisible, yet it soon became one of America's most decisive weapons. The Commission embraced pragmatism over perfection. Instead of advanced, complex designs, it prioritized ships that could be built quickly by workers with minimal experience. The result was the Liberty ship, a plain, boxy cargo vessel. The Liberty ship wasn't elegant. Its engines used older technology. Its lines were straight, its hull unadorned. But every detail was chosen for one purpose: speed of construction under wartime conditions. Beauty could wait. Quantity couldn't. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, launched in September 1941. She took 244 days to complete. Admirals worried the pace was too slow, but Land knew the real story was just beginning. Within months, construction times plummeted. By early 1942, new Liberty ships were finished in under 100 days. By late 1942, shipyards completed them in less than 50. The learning curve was breathtaking. This acceleration wasn't luck. The Commission poured resources into training programs, transforming farmers and clerks into shipfitters and welders. Merchant mariners were trained at lightning speed, their courses compressed from 4 years to only 18 months. By war's end, more than 250,000 merchant sailors had joined the ranks, a fleet of manpower larger than Japan's entire maritime workforce. America wasn't just building ships, it was building the people to crew them. Shipyards expanded like cities within cities. Welding torches illuminated night skies as workers labored around the clock. Cafeterias, dormitories, and bus lines appeared almost overnight, designed to sustain relentless 24-hour production. Coordination was everything. Engines arrived from one supplier, steel plates from another, weaponry from yet another. The Maritime Commission orchestrated these deliveries with astonishing precision, ensuring nothing slowed the rhythm of assembly. Every Liberty ship launched was more than a vessel. It was proof that democracy, when mobilized, could wield an industrial machine as potent as any weapon. Japanese intelligence, counting slips and cranes, never saw this system. The gamble was immense. If Liberty ships proved too fragile or too slow, the entire strategy could collapse. But they endured. They carried troops, ammunition, fuel, and food through submarine-infested seas, sustaining campaigns across 2 oceans. By October 1943, American shipyards were producing over 100 Liberty ships a month, more than 3 per day. Each launch represented not just steel and labor, but a visible rejection of Japan's early confidence. To Roosevelt, Liberty ships symbolized something larger, the arsenal of democracy. Each hull sliding into the water carried the promise that America's enemies could not outlast its factories, no matter how brilliant their tactics or fierce their spirit. The Maritime Commission's gamble paid off in spectacular fashion. By choosing simplicity, scale, and coordination, it rewrote the rules of naval warfare. America would not just rebuild its fleet, it would overwhelm the Pacific with steel. And as Liberty ships spread across the oceans, their unassuming silhouettes carried a truth Tokyo could no longer ignore. Logistics had become strategy, and America had bet everything on an industrial miracle it was already winning. When the Maritime Commission sought shipbuilders, one name emerged unexpectedly: Henry J. Kaiser. He wasn't a naval man. He had never built a ship. His background was in roads, dams, and massive construction projects. What Kaiser brought was a revolutionary mindset. He believed any complex task could be broken into simple, repeatable steps. Shipbuilding, in his eyes, wasn't an art form. It was an engineering problem waiting for efficiency. Traditional shipyards scoffed. For generations, vessels had been built slowly, sequentially, from keel to mast. Kaiser shattered that model. At his Richmond, California yards, ships were built like puzzles, assembled from massive prefabricated sections. Bow sections were constructed separately while sterns took shape elsewhere. Deckhouses were pre-assembled with plumbing and wiring before ever touching a hull. Cranes lifted finished components into place. Suddenly, what once took years now required weeks. Kaiser's shipyards grew into sprawling complexes, 4 massive facilities containing 55 shipways. The scale was staggering. Welding sparks lit up the bay, and the thunder of hammers echoed day and night without pause. He revolutionized labor as well. Skilled shipbuilders were scarce, so Kaiser redesigned the work itself. Instead of training full shipwrights, he created specialists. A welder might master one joint type and repeat it flawlessly thousands of times. This division of labor made shipbuilding accessible to untrained workers. Housewives, farmers, and clerks became welders, riveters, and crane operators. Within months, America's workforce included thousands who had never before set foot in a shipyard. Kaiser recognized that productivity wasn't just about shipways. Workers needed housing, healthcare, and childcare to stay reliable. He built entire communities, complete with schools, clinics, and even 24-hour nurseries for families. His health system for workers would later evolve into Kaiser Permanente, one of America's largest healthcare organizations. What began as a wartime necessity became a lasting legacy, born from the drive to keep workers healthy and efficient. For women, Kaiser's shipyards offered groundbreaking opportunities. Welding, riveting, and crane operation had once been male-only domains. Now, Rosie the Riveter became reality, her work critical to keeping the production lines running at relentless pace. Minorities, too, found opportunities, though barriers and discrimination persisted. Still, Kaiser's system opened doors that had long been sealed, reshaping the American workforce and planting seeds of social change that would last beyond the war. Innovation extended beyond labor. When housing shortages threatened production, Kaiser built entire cities. When transport clogged, he added bus lines. Every potential bottleneck was attacked with pragmatic, often radical solutions that kept the yards humming. The results were staggering. Stories circulated of Liberty ships completed in mere days. Though some tales were exaggerated, the underlying truth was undeniable. Production times shrank dramatically, and ships poured from Richmond's ways at record pace. By the war's end, Kaiser's yards alone had launched more than 700 ships. His methods redefined what was possible, proving that industrial assembly line principles could apply to even the most complex naval engineering challenges. Japanese intelligence never accounted for this. They counted shipyards but never the innovations within them. To Tokyo, Kaiser's workforce looked unskilled, even chaotic. In reality, specialization made them faster, more efficient, and shockingly productive. For sailors and Marines on the front lines, Kaiser's revolution was invisible, but essential. Every Liberty ship delivered meant more fuel, more ammunition, more food, the difference between survival and collapse on distant battlefields. Kaiser's impact extended far beyond the war. His approach to modular assembly, labor specialization, and integrated worker support reshaped modern industry. The lessons learned in Richmond would influence manufacturing worldwide for decades. In the crucible of war, Henry Kaiser proved that shipbuilding wasn't about tradition or prestige. It was about imagination, organization, and relentless drive. His revolution turned America's industrial gamble into a tide Japan could never resist. On December 7, 1941, Japan struck Pearl Harbor with breathtaking precision. Battleships burned, planes exploded, and America reeled in shock. For Tokyo, it seemed like a flawless victory. The Pacific Fleet left crippled and humiliated. Yet beneath the smoke and shattered steel, the attack carried fatal oversights. The Japanese had destroyed battleships but missed America's carriers. They overlooked repair facilities, submarine pens, and, most importantly, the massive fuel depots nearby. Had those tanks been ignited, the Pacific Fleet might have been paralyzed for months. Instead, the infrastructure remained intact, enabling a recovery far faster than Japanese planners imagined possible. Victory already carried the seeds of reversal. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the attack, understood this more than most. Educated in America, he knew the nation's industrial power. His warning was chilling. Japan might run wild for 6 months, but not beyond. Within weeks, Yamamoto's fears proved valid. American shipyards surged into action, reactivating mothballed vessels and launching Liberty ships at an accelerating pace. The industrial machine Japan, dismissed as inefficient, now awakened with terrifying momentum. The attack also unified a divided America. Isolationism collapsed overnight. Unions suspended strikes, women flooded factories, and political squabbles gave way to relentless mobilization. Pearl Harbor transformed hesitation into determination, welding a fractured society into purpose. In Tokyo, leaders celebrated tactical success but failed to recognize the strategic disaster. Instead of weakening American resolve, they had provoked a nation with vast resources into a total war it was destined to win. The Pacific Fleet, though battered, was never broken. Carriers like Enterprise and Lexington remained afloat, soon becoming the backbone of counteroffensives. Submarines slipped out of Pearl Harbor unharmed, beginning campaigns that would strangle Japan's shipping lifelines. Most devastating was the psychological effect. Americans who once questioned intervention now demanded vengeance. Newspapers screamed for retribution, and recruiting offices overflowed. Japan had awakened not just industry, but an entire population's will to fight. By mid-1942, American resilience was on full display at Midway. Intelligence, carriers, and sheer determination turned the tide, sinking 4 Japanese carriers. Pearl Harbor's shock had been answered with a crushing counterblow. Strategically, Pearl Harbor backfired because it underestimated time. Japan hoped to end the war quickly. Instead, it gave America the time and motivation to unleash the greatest industrial surge in history. Japanese commanders misread the importance of logistics. Destroying ships was one thing, but failing to eliminate repair yards and fuel stores meant America could bounce back. They attacked hardware while leaving the support systems untouched. Even as battleships lay sunken in shallow waters, divers and engineers swarmed to salvage them. Within months, several returned to service, patched and refitted, sailing again under their own power to fight another day. In hindsight, Pearl Harbor's brilliance was only tactical. Strategically, it was a catastrophe for Japan. The strike gave them early momentum, but doomed them to fight an enemy stronger, faster, and more united than ever before. Japan had gambled on shock and awe, believing spirit and precision could outweigh industry. But Pearl Harbor proved that courage and daring could not overcome steel mills, assembly lines, and an enraged democracy bent on revenge. As 1942 rolled forward, Liberty ships slid into oceans, carriers roamed the Pacific, and convoys stretched across seas. The very blow Japan believed decisive had instead opened the door to its inevitable downfall. Pearl Harbor remains etched in history as both tragedy and turning point. It was America's darkest hour, but also the spark that transformed weakness into overwhelming strength, ensuring Japan's triumph would collapse beneath the weight of its own miscalculation. By 1942, America's shipyards had become something extraordinary. Where once hulls crawled from the ways in months, now ships poured out in weeks. The industrial avalanche had begun, and Japan had no hope of matching it. Monthly completions climbed at breathtaking speed. In January 1942, 5 Liberty ships slid into the water. By March, 14. By June, 33. By September, 67. Each number marked not just steel, but momentum. The peak came in October 1943. 106 Liberty ships launched in a single month, more than 3 a day. Japanese analysts refused to believe the reports. They thought them fabrications, exaggerations, impossible. But the truth was undeniable. Each vessel represented an intricate ballet of logistics, steel plates delivered in sequence, engines from distant factories arriving on time, components from hundreds of suppliers merging in perfect synchrony. It was industrial choreography. The avalanche was not just about cargo ships. Destroyer escorts, vital for hunting submarines, appeared in the hundreds. Escort carriers, converted from merchant hulls, suddenly provided air cover across the Pacific, making Japanese submarine operations increasingly suicidal. American submarines, too, benefited from this tide. Supported by tankers, repair ships, and supply tenders, they roamed further and struck harder. Japan's merchant fleet, already thin, shrank month by month under relentless assault. For the Japanese high command, numbers blurred into nightmare. They had predicted a trickle, manageable with bold tactics. Instead, they faced a flood. Ships multiplying faster than torpedoes and bombs could destroy them. Reports from submarine commanders were grim. Convoys now stretched horizon to horizon, ringed with escorts. Air patrols spotted periscopes before attacks began. What once seemed easy hunting became missions of near-certain death. Behind every ship was a worker. Millions of Americans contributed, their torches and hammers echoing day and night. Farmers became welders, teachers became riveters, clerks became machinists. The avalanche was powered by ordinary hands. Women made up nearly a third of some shipyard workforces. Their welding arcs lit the nights, their rivets secured hulls, their endurance kept production moving. The Rosies weren't propaganda posters, they were the avalanche incarnate. Minorities, too, found new roles. Discrimination persisted, yet war forced open doors. African Americans gained skilled positions once denied them. Immigrants contributed their crafts. America's industrial surge became not just mechanical, but profoundly social in scope. Shipyards themselves evolved into marvels. Massive cranes lifted 100-ton sections into place. Railroads snaked across yards, shuttling components with precision. Machine shops and foundries thrummed alongside assembly lines, each piece of the puzzle arriving just in time. Efficiency soared. By late 1944, Liberty ships required only a third of the labor hours they had in 1942. Experience, specialization, and sheer determination transformed wartime production into a finely tuned industrial engine. Japan's planners could not fathom it. They imagined a nation slowed by strikes, inefficiency, and chaos. Instead, they faced a society that had turned every weakness into strength, every division into fuel for the avalanche. The scale of output defied comprehension. America produced over 5,000 merchant vessels during the war, more than 50 million tons of shipping. Japan, by contrast, managed a fraction, often watching ships sink faster than they were built. For every Japanese vessel lost, replacements were scarce. For every American vessel sunk, 3 more took its place. Numbers became destiny, and the avalanche buried Japan beneath mathematics. It could neither fight nor escape. This was not victory through dramatic battles alone. It was victory through production. Relentless, overwhelming, unceasing. The industrial avalanche rolled forward, unstoppable, reshaping the Pacific War until Japan's empire drowned beneath a tide of steel. In the early months of war, Japanese submarines prowled Pacific waters with deadly efficiency. They hunted independently, sinking carriers, transports, and cruisers. For a moment, it seemed Japan might strangle America's supply lifelines at sea. Commander Kanashi Takakazu of I-19 delivered one of Japan's greatest submarine victories, striking the USS Wasp in September 1942. His torpedoes also damaged 2 other ships, proving that Japan's undersea fleet could unleash devastating blows. But as 1942 wore on, the ocean itself began to change. American convoys grew larger, escorts more numerous, and air patrols more persistent. Submarines once feared as hunters soon found themselves stalked and cornered in return. The transformation stemmed from industry. Destroyer escorts poured from American yards, cheap and plentiful. Escort carriers, converted from merchant hulls, extended air cover across oceans. The logistical avalanche that fueled fleets also made convoys nearly impregnable. By 1943, attacking American convoys had become an act of desperation. Japanese submarine crews often returned home with empty torpedo tubes, chased endlessly by sonar pings and depth charges that turned hunts into nightmares. American submarines, meanwhile, unleashed their own campaign with merciless precision. Supported by tenders, fuel tankers, and repair ships, they operated far from bases, sinking Japanese transports faster than shipyards could replace them. Japan's merchant fleet was its lifeline, carrying oil from the Indies, rice from Southeast Asia, iron ore from China. Every ship lost tightened the noose, starving factories and garrisons alike. Submarines made Japan bleed. Convoy reports grew grim. By late 1943, losses exceeded replacements. Merchant captains spoke of sailing under constant fear, their routes tracked by unseen predators. Supplies that once arrived steadily now trickled or vanished entirely. For submarine commanders like Kanashi, the war turned bitter. Patrols became survival tests. Once bold attacks gave way to cautious avoidance. Even skilled crews recognized they were now prey in an ocean filled with hunters. American advancements in radar and sonar sealed the fate of Japan's undersea force. Submarines could be detected before they fired, hounded relentlessly until fuel ran low or crews faced exhaustion from endless evasion. The shift was so stark that by 1944, Japanese submarines were reassigned primarily to supply runs, ferrying rice and ammunition to isolated garrisons. Hunters had become delivery men, burdened with tasks that reflected desperation. Each mission was perilous. Submarines surfaced under moonlight to unload crates, often while American planes circled above. Supplies reached hungry soldiers, but the cost was staggering, with many boats never returning from these desperate errands. The industrial disparity magnified every encounter. America could afford to lose ships, replacing them threefold. Japan could not. Every submarine lost was irreplaceable. Every merchant sunk a wound that never healed. Sailors described oceans alive with steel. Convoys stretched horizon to horizon, destroyers prowling like wolves, aircraft circling constantly overhead. The Pacific had transformed from a hunting ground into a fortress afloat. Japanese officers bitterly remarked that America seemed to have built a destroyer for every ton of rice in Japan. The exaggeration carried truth. Escorts multiplied until the sea itself was hostile. For civilians back home, the effects were devastating. Food shortages grew severe, fuel rationing tightened, and factories slowed. The empire, once flush with resources, now starved, its lifelines shredded by the unseen war beneath the waves. By war's end, Japan's submarine fleet lay shattered, its merchant marine decimated. The hunters had been turned inside out, victims of an industrial tide they could neither match nor resist. The ocean belonged to America. By 1944, the war in the Pacific had become a contest of arithmetic. Japan's courage and tactics remained, but America's production numbers swelled so massively that defeat was no longer avoidable, only delayed. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 revealed the truth. American Task Force 58 deployed more carriers, battleships, and escorts than the entire pre-war Imperial Navy. Japan's air arm was shredded in a single clash. American pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over 400 Japanese planes fell while fewer than 30 U.S. aircraft were lost. Numbers had become destiny, and the skies told the story. Admiral Soemu Toyota later admitted the outcome was clear after the Marianas. Japan had no chance to replace its losses, while America replaced them with ease. Every pilot lost meant another irreplaceable gap. The battles only grew larger. At Leyte Gulf, the U.S. deployed hundreds of vessels, including fleets of carriers and escorts. The scale dwarfed anything Japan could assemble, overwhelming them through sheer mass and coordination. American firepower had reached surreal levels. At Iwo Jima, the preliminary bombardment unleashed more shells than many nations possessed in total stockpiles. At Okinawa, a staggering 1,400 vessels gathered, perhaps history's largest armada. Japan countered with desperation. Kamikaze attacks struck with terrifying ferocity, sinking dozens of ships and damaging hundreds. Yet, America's industrial base absorbed the blows. Damaged vessels were repaired, lost ships replaced, crews trained faster than losses mounted. This was the cruel truth of arithmetic warfare. Valor could sink a destroyer, but America could launch 3 more before the week ended. Heroic sacrifice altered battles, but could not alter mathematics. By 1945, America's logistical machine stretched across the Pacific. Convoys delivered supplies without pause. Repair ships patched damage in weeks. Tankers kept fleets fueled endlessly. The war's momentum was no longer tactical, it was numerical. Japanese officers later described their recognition in stages. After Midway, they lost initiative. After Guadalcanal, momentum slipped. After the Marianas, the war was lost. After the Philippines, they awaited the end. After Okinawa, they prayed for it. Civilians endured bombing campaigns that underscored the imbalance. B-29s thundered overhead, each one a marvel of mass production. Japan struggled even to intercept them, lacking the fuel, planes, and trained pilots to mount serious resistance. Factories, once symbols of ambition, stood idle without raw materials. Merchant shipping had collapsed. The empire starved, its garrisons abandoned, its people increasingly aware that courage could not conjure food, steel, or fuel from thin air. American abundance appeared casual. Fleets moved as though losses were inconsequential. Ammunition flowed like water. Fuel burned without concern. The empire that struck Pearl Harbor had awakened a foe whose capacity seemed limitless. The arithmetic was merciless. America built more ships in a single month than Japan in an entire year. Every day, more steel entered the ocean, while Japan's reserves dwindled into nothingness. Kamikaze pilots understood this futility. Their sacrifice inflicted pain, but no strategic shift. For every ship damaged, replacements waited. For every casualty, another sailor trained. Their bravery met not weakness, but an inexhaustible reservoir. Japan's leaders knew the truth before surrender. The war was mathematically lost. Courage could not equalize thousands of ships, millions of tons of steel, and factories roaring without pause across an entire continent. The mathematics of defeat carried a brutal lesson. In modern war, industry mattered more than strategy, logistics more than valor. Japan's empire crumbled not from lack of spirit, but from the cold, relentless arithmetic of production. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the world looked upon the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki as decisive. Yet the truth was deeper. Japan had already been defeated by America's factories and shipyards. The ghost fleet that once rusted in forgotten rivers had been the first spark. Those reactivated hulks bridged the gap, buying precious time until new ships cascaded off assembly lines in unstoppable waves. Between 1941 and 1945, America launched over 5,000 merchant vessels, totaling more than 50 million tons. It built more ships in single months than Japan constructed in entire years. The scale was breathtaking, and these weren't only cargo haulers. Destroyer escorts, escort carriers, troop transports, and tenders flowed from the yards, forming an ecosystem of support ships that made offensive operations across the vast Pacific logistically possible. Every battle, Guadalcanal, the Marianas, Leyte, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, was sustained by ships born from this surge. Without them, fleets would have stalled, armies starved, and campaigns collapsed before reaching their shores. The legacy extended beyond steel. America's workforce had transformed. Women welded hulls, minorities gained skilled positions, and entire communities were built around shipyards. Wartime necessity cracked barriers, planting seeds of social change that endured afterward. Henry Kaiser's worker housing and health systems pioneered models of labor support. His medical plan evolved into Kaiser Permanente, a permanent institution born from war but reshaping healthcare for millions in peace. The techniques of modular assembly, prefabrication, and labor specialization spread into post-war industry. Automobiles, aviation, construction, all absorbed lessons forged in the frantic years of shipbuilding. The Ghost Fleet's revival rippled into global manufacturing. Even Japan adopted these methods after defeat. Its post-war recovery leaned on mass production, efficiency, and industrial discipline. Ironically, the very techniques that had crushed its empire became the foundation of its economic resurgence. Naval doctrine changed forever. The age of decisive battleships gave way to the era of logistics and carriers. The factory floor proved as decisive as the battlefield, reshaping how nations prepared for war. Military planners worldwide absorbed the lesson. Spirit and tactics mattered, but they were powerless without industry. Wars of the modern age would be decided not only in trenches or skies, but in assembly lines and shipping lanes. The Ghost Fleet, once dismissed as obsolete, symbolized resilience. It proved that no resource is truly worthless if paired with imagination and urgency. From rusting hulks, America found a bridge to victory. For Japan, the lesson was bitter. They had struck boldly, fought courageously, yet underestimated the invisible engine of democracy. They counted ships, but not systems, battles, but not logistics, courage, but not capacity. For America, the lesson was sobering. Victory was purchased not only with valor on beaches, but with sweat in shipyards. Every rivet and weld carried the same weight as every bullet fired in combat. The story endures because it reveals a paradox. Japan lost not for lack of bravery, but because bravery cannot outbuild an industrial giant. America triumphed not just through force, but through the arithmetic of production. In the end, the Ghost Fleet's legacy was transformation. It showed how democratic societies, once roused, could achieve mobilizations authoritarian regimes could not imagine. It proved that freedom and industry together could overwhelm even the fiercest enemy. And so, the rusted ships that stirred to life in 1941 carried more than cargo. They carried a truth that shaped the modern world. In the age of total war, steel and factories win empires or bury them.